Perfect. All right, great. Well, welcome everyone and good afternoon to everyone who's joined us today. My name is William Moore with OJJDP NTTAC National Training and Technical Assistance Center. Thank you all so much for joining us for today's web grant solicitation, OJJDP FY 2019 Specialized Services and Mentoring for Child and Youth Victims of Sex Trafficking and Sexual Exploitation Grant Solicitation. Again, my name is William Moore, and I'm going to just go over a few Adobe Connect webinar platform features for today's webinar. Please note that this event is being recorded and will be published on NTTAC's YouTube channel. The webinar recording will be archived on NTTAC's YouTube channel, where you can also view past webinars. For the event transcript and supporting materials, please contact the OJJDP TA Help Desk. For those wishing to download a copy of the PowerPoint slides and other important documents, you do so by locating the handouts pod directly above the chat area. Here, you will also find an FAQ for webinar participants that will likely address any technical related questions. Click on the name of the file and then click the download button. During today's webinar, the presenter will address questions during our Q&A segment of the webinar, where I will assist with the moderation of those questions. Please type your questions into the chat box as they arise. For those of you participating in today's webinar as a group, please take a minute to help us count. Go to the chat window and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you are viewing alone, there's no need to type anything into the chat window at this time. And I'll give folks just a couple of seconds to do so. Please type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. Again, if you're viewing alone, there's no need to type anything at this time. Following today's grant solicitation webinar, attendees will be sent a certificate of attendance. This certificate is sent approximately 1 hour following the conclusion of the event and is sent via an Adobe Connect thank you email. Please keep an eye on your email for your certificate. Also, please note that only participants that are registered and signed in will receive a certificate of attendance. At the conclusion of today's webinar, you will be provided with a link to a brief evaluation about today's presentation. The feedback you provide is used to assist in future planning and training. Again, my name is William Moore with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention's National Training and Technical Assistance Center. And again, I will be assisting to moderate with the Q&A at the very end of today's grant solicitation. But now at this time, I would like to turn today's webinar over to Cindy Pappas. Thank you.
Thank you, William. Again, my name is Cindy Pappas. I am a Senior Policy Advisor with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And I will be managing this program, the FY 2019 Specialized Services and Mentoring for Child and Youth Victims of Sex Trafficking and Sexual Exploitation. I'm going to try not to have to say that title too many times because it is a lengthy one, but I thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We have well over 100 participants. I know we have quite a few more registered, and those of you who are listening in groups. We do appreciate your time and your attention and your interest in this funding opportunity, so welcome. Before I get started, for those who are not familiar, and also let me do a quick pause. If at any point you have a hard time hearing me, please put a note in the chat just so that I know that I can be heard and that I'm coming through clearly, so I appreciate that. Before we begin, a little bit about our office. the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, OJJDP, is a component of the Office of Justice programs within the U.S. Department of Justice. OJP's program offices include the Bureau of Justice Assistance, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the National Institute of Justice, the Office for Victims of Crime, and the Office of Sex Offender Sentencing, Monitoring, Apprehending, Registering, and Tracking, also known as the SMART Office. And again, I am with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, where our vision and where we envision a nation where our children are free from crime and violence. And if they do come into contact with the justice system, that contact should be both just and beneficial to them. Here you'll see our mission by supporting states, local communities, and tribal jurisdictions in your efforts to develop and implement effective programs for juveniles. Our office strives to strengthen the juvenile justice system's efforts to protect public safety, hold offenders appropriately accountable, and provide services that address the needs of youth and their families. So during today's webinar, I'll provide an overview of, and say it again, the FY 2019 Specialized Services and Mentoring for Child and Youth Victims of Sex Trafficking and Sexual Exploitation Grant Solicitation. So if you were here for another solicitation information, if you thought this actually was a webinar on this specific topic, not a grant funding solicitation webinar, this is what we'll be doing today. And I'll be providing a review of the solicitation requirements. I'll highlight the resources and tools available to help in the application process. And as William noted, there will be time at the end for questions at the end, but please know this is not the only opportunity that you will have for questions. Within the solicitation, also at the end of this presentation, I will give resources and links and the number to our response center as well as grants.gov. So those two will be vital components and vital resources as you are developing your solicitation. The response center will be any questions that you have as you're writing about the requirements. And then the grants.gov resource center if you have any technological issues as you're submitting the application. So you will not be alone after this presentation, but hopefully I will be able to address and answer any questions that you may have. So here is the link to the solicitation. Again, I'll be walking through it. If you have not downloaded it, then now may be a good time to pull it up, either get it printed out or get your notes ready. So if you have questions, you can jot them down as we're going through the solicitation today. And the number one thing to circle is that deadline. This is a very important deadline we hold very seriously too. So applications are due no later than 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on July 29th, 2019. Now, while this is the deadline, again, we'll take them up until 11:59. We really do recommend that you submit your applications at least 72 hours prior to the deadline, and really this is with any grant solicitations. Give yourself that time in the event problems do occur. You will receive a validation and a verification notice from grants.gov. So if there's issues, this will give you ample time and opportunity to fix whatever issues there may be and get it submitted so that we can really take a look at your application and in a timely manner. So very first thing is, are you eligible even to apply? And again, this is important before you invest the time and effort, and it is time and effort that goes into these application development. So for all three categories, which I will be covering in detail, this is the applicant eligibility. It is limited to states, including territories, units of local government, federally recognized Indian tribal governments, nonprofit organizations, and for-profit organizations, including tribal nonprofit and for-profit organizations, and institutions of higher education, including tribal institutions of higher education. And if you're not sure where you fit, on page 2 details all of the applicant eligibility. So really take a close look, and if you fall into any of these categories, please do continue. For all three categories, we'll consider applications under which 2 or more entities could carry out the award. So you can come in with a partner, and please note only one entity may be the applicant. The other partners must be proposed as subrecipients or subgrantees. And the entity that would have the primary responsibility, and that's all the administration of the funding, managing the entire program, should be the one who is serving as the applicant. Also, please note that there's only one application per applicant. So even though there are 3 categories, we will be accepting one application per applicant, so an applicant cannot come in from multiple categories as the entity. So the purpose of this funding is to enhance the capacity of your organizations to respond to the needs of children and youth who are victims of sexual exploitation, domestic sex trafficking, as well as labor trafficking. Through this solicitation, we are seeking proposals from agencies to provide mentoring and supportive services for children and youth who are victims of sexual exploitation and domestic sex trafficking, boys who are often go unidentified as victims of trafficking, and girls who are vulnerable to trafficking and who are most likely to end up in the juvenile justice system. Those are essentially our 3 categories, which I will get into in great detail. So category 1 is specialized services and mentoring for child and youth victims of sex trafficking and sexual exploitation. Under category 1, we anticipate making up to 4 awards. The maximum dollar amount for each award is $450,000 for a total of $1.8 million. So this is really important. We tend to get questions and some errors within what this means. So these are 4 awards up to $450,000 each. That is not $450,000 per year over the 3-year time frame. That is the total amount of the award. So when you fill out your budgets, when you do your budget narratives in the summary sheet, that total summary amount should not be more than $450,000 across those 3 years. And this award would begin October 1st, and again, it is a 36-month time frame. The children and youth who are victims of sexual exploitation and domestic sex trafficking, as many of you in this field know, have a complicated constellation of risk factors and vulnerabilities, service needs, and challenges. So it's critical to provide comprehensive support services and interventions that address these varied needs. The research has shown that mentoring can improve self-esteem, academic achievement, and peer relationships, reduce drug use, aggression, depressive symptoms, and delinquent acts. So this category really supports the efforts of your organizations to increase the availability of direct support services for children and youth who are victims of sexual exploitation, domestic sex trafficking, and or to enhance the mentoring capacity and facilitate outreach efforts to identify those youth. For the purpose of this solicitation, for this category, OJJDP defines child and youth as anyone younger than the age of 18. Any application submitted for category 1 must allow services for both boys and girls. The specific objectives of category 1 are to develop, expand, or enhance access to comprehensive, supportive, direct services for youth who are at risk for or are victims of sexual exploitation or domestic sex trafficking, including but not limited to intensive case management, court advocacy, appropriate housing and shelter, safety planning, mental health treatment, medical care, dental care, substance abuse treatment, acquiring identification or benefit. Can also apply funding for specialized educational services, GED, job training, employment assistance, transportation, victim advocacy, and other support services. So that's a tremendous amount of information just in that one objective, but really any direct services to support the needs of these children and youth. Even to include accompanying the victim during his or her participation in a criminal prosecution against the offender when appropriate. Yes, question just came in, as well as direct services for medical services such as forensics. So anything that enhances the direct support services for these children and youth. Thank you for the question. The second objective listed here is to develop or enhance mental service models for youth who are at risk for or are victims of sexual exploitation, domestic sex trafficking. At the end, in our resource link, and it's listed several times throughout the solicitation, is a link to OJJDP's National Mentoring Resource Center website. And this is an excellent resource for you to determine how to integrate the elements of effective practice for mentoring into your program models. So for this category, that's a great resource. And then in the other two categories, if you are selecting those categories and if you are looking to use a mentoring service model, that resource will be a tremendous tool for you. Again, I'll cover that again in case it's missed, but it's also in the solicitation. And our third specific objective is to implement or enhance efforts to identify youth who are at risk for or are victims of sexual exploitation, domestic sex trafficking. Now this can include street outreach efforts, partnerships with organizations that serve the youth community, and or collaboration with key stakeholders in the community. And the fourth objective is to implement or enhance baseline training for mentors and provide ongoing development and support after the initial training is complete. We also OJJDP funds a dedicated training and technical assistance provider for this initiative, and program sites will be expected to work closely with this provider when developing and implementing any mentor training to include an annual peer-to-peer learning opportunity. So I'll talk about that annual opportunity, specifically when we go into the budget, and that you will need to budget for representatives to attend this annual training. But the TTA provider will be there to support your efforts and assist you throughout the entire time of the award. So the question, a couple questions are coming in I can address as we're in them. So should applicants look to address all objectives? In some form, yes, you should be looking to address these 4 objectives in your application. Category 2 is to enhance service delivery for boys who are victims of sex and labor trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation. Now, federal law prohibits recipients of OJP funding from discriminating in the delivery of services on the basis of age, race, color, national origin, sex, religion, or disability. However, in some cases, the applicant may limit services based upon sex and refer otherwise eligible beneficiaries outside of the specialized group to the other services. That is why we can fund this program and target it towards boys who are victims of sex and labor trafficking. So under this category, we will be making up to 3 awards. Again, this is 3 awards in the amount of $450,000 each. That is not per year. That is for the entire program period of 36 months, which would begin October 1st. And again, many of you, as I'm looking at all of your names and where you're coming from, the organizations, you are familiar in working within these systems, and many of you who work in this know that boys who are victims of sex trafficking and sexual exploitation are very often overlooked and in many cases underserved, even though several studies have noted that roughly half of commercially sexually exploited youth are males. And boys impacted by sexual exploitation are often less likely to admit that they have they have been victimized, which can also impact a service provider's, your ability to identify male victims of child sex and labor trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation. It's crucial for service providers to acknowledge that males can be victims of sex trafficking, labor trafficking, and commercial sexual exploitation, and to offer high-quality, individualized support services. And that is the purpose of this category of this funding, to provide direct support services. This can include mentoring service models to boys who are victims of sex and labor trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation, and to provide targeted training for professionals who work with these boys and young men. The specific objectives under Category 2 are to develop and implement outreach strategies designed to increase identification of boys who are victims of sex and labor trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation. Second, to develop, expand, or enhance access to comprehensive supportive direct services, including mentoring, for boys. And a question came in, yes, this is defined as self-identified as such. For boys who are victims of sex and labor trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation, to include access to housing that is safe and has resources to meet the unique needs. This can include access to a wide range of trauma-informed physical and mental health services, which can include traditional care services such as peer-to-peer counseling, access to legal support to ensure male survivors are aware of their rights and have access to legal proceedings, and access to employment assistance that includes education, skills training, and job placement. Beyond using program funds to support some of these services, applicants are encouraged to enhance existing community collaborations and partnerships to provide these supportive services. Our third specific objective is to develop or enhance mentor service models for boys who are victims of sex and labor trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation. If you are choosing to do a mentoring service model, we recommend that you also utilize the resource National Mentoring Resource Center website to determine how to integrate the elements of effective practices for mentoring into your program models. Again, I'll have that link, and that link and additional information about how to access that resource is in the solicitation. And the fourth objective is to develop and provide training for program staff on male victims of sex and labor trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation, including the stereotypes and biases that exist specific to males in trafficking. Sites selected under this category will be expected to work closely with OJJDP's TTA provider when developing and implementing any mentor training to include an annual peer-to-peer learning opportunity, which again, during the budget discussion, I'll get into in more detail on how to put in funding for that opportunity. In our third category is preventing sex trafficking of girls and involvement in the juvenile justice system. Under Category 3, we anticipate making up to 4 awards in the amount of $450,000 each. Again, just to reiterate, that is $450 per award and up to. You certainly do not have to come in for the total amount, the maximum amount, but certainly not over $450,000 for the entire length of the award, which will begin October 1st for a period of 36 months. So the risk factors that make youth vulnerable to sexual exploitation, domestic sex trafficking can include having a history of childhood sexual and physical abuse. 73% of girls in the juvenile justice system had past histories of physical and sexual abuse, according to Rights for Girls, a human rights organization dedicated to ending gender-based violence against young women and girls in the United States. In response, this category supports the efforts of eligible applicants to provide prevention and early intervention services. This can include mentoring service models to girls involved in the juvenile justice system, as well as girls vulnerable to sexual exploitation, domestic sex trafficking, and who are most likely to end up in the juvenile justice system. This also includes providing targeted training for professionals, including probation, law enforcement, judges, etc., working with these youth. Applications submitted by non-government organizations should consider the importance of an established partnership with public juvenile justice agencies at the local or state level. And this will be a priority consideration, so those that show evidence of a formal relationship. And by formal, we mean a fully executed memorandum of understanding between the agencies that address the objectives of this funding opportunity. So partnering with a partnership with a public juvenile justice agency at the local state level will be a priority consideration under this category. An applicant in Category 3 does not have to implement a mentoring program. That can be one of the services that they provide, though, that would be funded. In Category 3, the specific objectives are to implement prevention and early intervention, programs, and again, this can include mentoring based on best practices for girls who are at risk or are victims of sexual exploitation, domestic sex trafficking, and or are currently in the juvenile justice system. Program models should include a plan to develop effective services and interventions for high-risk or system-involved youth, including those with a history of trauma caused by physical or sexual abuse, commercial sexual exploitation, and domestic minor sex trafficking. And this could and should engage a broad range of stakeholders. This can include law enforcement, prosecutors, juvenile defenders, judges, probation officers, victim service providers, researchers, advocates, and most importantly, girls, young women, and their families. Secondly, applicants who propose to develop or enhance mentor service models, again, this is not a requirement, but if you do choose to utilize a mentor service model, we do recommend the OJJDP National Mentoring Resource Center website to integrate the elements of effective practices for mentoring into your program models. Once again, sites selected under this category as well as the other two will be expected to work closely with our TTA provider when developing and implementing any mentor training to include an annual peer-to-peer learning opportunity hosted by the TTA provider. The third objective is to implement screening and assessment protocols or processes to identify those girls in the juvenile justice system who are at risk or are victims of sexual exploitation, domestic sex trafficking. And the fourth and final objective is to develop or enhance reentry strategies to help vulnerable girls on a path towards success, stability, and long-term contribution to society while offering them opportunities to heal. Now this can include therapeutic communities, mentoring, case management, cognitive behavioral programs, and reentry courts. Program models should be evidence-based and consider girls' unique life experiences and should address the effects of past trauma, the fear of stigma, the need for trusting relationships with adults. Agencies that could be involved in reentry efforts could include residential facility staff, juvenile probation or parole officers, mental behavioral health service providers, and other community-based treatment providers, schools, family members, and other adults who can support the returning girls. A juvenile justice entity can apply for Category 3. So you'll see throughout the entire solicitation, this is one of your #1 resources, particularly as we get into all of the details in submitting the application. The grant application resource guide is in the solicitation, it's linked, and it will be a vital tool to assist your efforts and includes additional information on post-award reporting requirements, including performance measures data. So again, that's linked and should be something that you open up and go through and take a close look at as you're going through the application process. And as I mentioned many times throughout in the beginning, our National Resource Center website, and then we have our funded Institute Medicine report, Confronting Sexual Exploitation of Sex Trafficking of Minors in the United States. You know what, William, I see I didn't, actually I said it a million times, but I didn't put the link in here. So I'm going to send you the link to put up into the chat box for the National Mentoring Resource Center before we close.
Sounds good.
My apologies for that. Thank you. Okay, so we can take a little breath. We went through the application, and now that I hope we have a greater sense of the purpose, I'll cover what you need to include in your application. And as I mentioned at the beginning, and I will reiterate at the end, if at any time you need technical assistance with submitting an application, you can contact the grants.gov customer support hotline. I'll give you that contact information. Again, it's also in the solicitation. And if at any time you have questions about the requirements, if I didn't cover them, if there's anything that I've missed or that as you're going through it you have a question about that doesn't quite make sense, you can contact our response center. The staff here are fantastic, and they're standing by to answer all of your questions. And again, it's listed in page 2 of the solicitation and will be at the end of this webinar. So here it is. This is everything, and it's a lot. And it's why we host some of these webinars, really to give you a sense of the work and the effort that goes into this. So I really appreciate your time in coming in and listening to this today, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done to meet that deadline. So we'll go through each one briefly. The grant application resource guide will serve as a vital tool as you're going through the application process, but keep in mind this is everything that we will need as we are going through the application review process. So the SF424, this is simply our required standard form. We use it as a cover sheet for submissions of pre-applications, applications, and related information. It's fairly simple. It's completed through grants.gov and has your basic information, the title of your project, and the amount of funding requested. It's a pretty easy one. The abstract should briefly, 400 words or less, describe the purpose of your project, the population to be served, which for all 3 categories will be youth under the age of 18, and the activities that you will implement to achieve the project's goals and objectives. This is a separate attachment, single space, 12-point font, and this will not be counted against the page limit in the program narrative, which I'll get into in a moment. But yeah, this is just your brief overview of the project. But this is where the meat of your information should lie. You should submit a program narrative with a detailed description of the purpose, goals, objectives, strategies, design, and management of your proposed program. This should be double-spaced, 1-inch margins, not exceeding 30 pages in length, and using a standard 12-point font, preferably Times New Roman. You can provide references as a separate attachment, and that will not count towards a 30-page program narrative limit. This is pretty important, and we are pretty stringent on this. If the program narrative fails to comply with these length-related restrictions, we may consider such non-compliance in peer review and in final award decisions. So keeping to that 30-page limit is pretty important. So within this narrative, the statement of the problem should briefly describe the nature and scope of the problem that the program will address. So any of the 3 categories in which you're applying. You should use data to provide evidence that the problem exists within your community, the size and scope of that problem, and the effects of the problem on the target population as well as the larger community. Please cite any of your data or research, and describe any research or evaluation studies that relate to the problem and contribute to your understanding of its causes and potential solutions, and anything that you have done in an attempt to address the problem. Applicants should detail how the project will operate throughout the funding period and describe the strategies that you will use to achieve the goals and objectives identified in the previous section. You should describe the deliverables stated in the goals, objectives, and deliverables section on page 12 of the solicitation. And we really do encourage that you select evidence-based practices for your programs in the project design and implementation. And include any details regarding any leverage resources, if there will be any cash or in-kind from local sources to support the project, and discuss plans for sustainability beyond the grant period. Please also include a logic model as a separate attachment and a timeline. Timelines are important. And again, the logic model and timeline as separate attachments do not count against or towards the 30-page limit of the narrative. But that timeline is really important. We look at that closely as a separate attachment. Please include major tasks associated with the goals and objectives of the project. Please assign responsibility for each. So whether that is you're coming in with a partner agency or your agency, or if you have it specific down to a person within your agency who will be responsible for those goals and objectives. And then completion of each task by month or quarter for the duration of the award, which we know is 36 months. So what is the timeline? We want to see that you've really thought through how you're going to be using this funding across these 36 months to really meet these goals and do the best to support these children and youth who are in need of our services. Capabilities and competencies, not easy to say, but is exactly what it says, to describe the experience and the capability of the applicant to, and any contractors or subgrantees that will use to implement and manage this effort and its associated federal funding. You should highlight any previous experience that you have implementing projects of similar design or magnitude. You should highlight your experience, capability, capacity to manage subawards if you are using subawards. The management and staffing patterns should clearly be connected to the project design described in the previous section. And you should describe the roles and responsibilities of project staff and explain program's organizational structure and operation. Please include a copy of your organizational chart showing how the organization operates, including who manages the finances, how the organization manages subawards, if there will be any, and the management of the project proposed for funding. So who will be providing oversight of this project should you be funded. If you're submitting a joint application, please include a signed and dated letter of support or memorandum of understanding for all key partners. Letters of support may be addressed to OJJDP Administrator Karen Harp, and only letters of support that are submitted by the due date, which we know is July 29th, with the full application will be considered during the review process. So we will not accept letters of support after. And as I mentioned earlier, specifically for Category 3 applicants, in order to receive that extra priority consideration, the applicant should include a copy of the fully executed Memorandum of Understanding between the Juvenile Justice Agency and the applicant as indicated in the solicitation. The letters of support do not count towards the page limit. This is an attachment, so it will not take away from that 30-page limit count. We also ask that you demonstrate your understanding of the performance data reporting requirements for this grant program and detail how you plan to gather the required data. It doesn't mean that you have to submit performance measure data with your application, just that your plan and your understanding of what we will be seeking and how we will be gathering it, and your plan for gathering that required data. This is where there are some distinctions between the categories. For Category 1 and 3, we have performance measures listed in Appendix A. So familiarize yourself with that if you're coming in for either Category 1 or Category 3 funding, and plan how you will address that data reporting requirement. For Category 2, your response to this section must include a plan for collecting all the performance measure data listed in Appendix B. So familiarize yourself with Appendix B, those data reporting requirements, your plan for collecting that data. You will also be required to provide relevant data by submitting regular client and performance data to the Office for Victims of Crime, this is OVC's, our sister agencies, Online Trafficking Information Management System, also known as TIMS Online. There's a link within the website, on this webinar as well as within the solicitation. And you'll be required to have an understanding and a plan for collecting that data as well. But really, I do want to reiterate, you do not need to submit this data with your application, just your plan and your understanding of it. Particularly and specifically with the TIMS Online, please describe the key staff who will be responsible for collecting the data and a plan for using TIMS Online in addition. And here you can learn more about our performance measure at this www.ojp.gov/performance. And I put in again and just really highlighting once again the grant application resource guide that has all the information you need on post-award reporting, including our performance measures data. When submitting your budget, please use an Excel version of the OJP's budget detail worksheet when completing your proposed budget in the application. This should be thorough, clear, really thorough, really clear of every cost listed in the narrative section for each budget category. We do look at this closely. It should be complete, cost-effective, allowable. What do you mean by allowable? That means reasonable, allocable, and necessary for project activities. The narrative should demonstrate generally how applicants will maximize cost effectiveness of grant expenditures, and the budget narrative should demonstrate cost effectiveness in relation to potential alternatives and the goals of the project. It should be mathematically sound and correspond clearly with the line items provided in the budget detail worksheet. The detail worksheet is within the solicitation, and successful applicants in Category 1 and those proposing mentoring programs in Category 2 and 3. So I'll say that again. Category 1 must. Category 2 and 3 if you are proposing mentoring programs. Mentoring services will be expected to participate in a 4-day peer learning collaborative meeting in the first year of the project and 1 2-day cross-site peer learning collaborative meeting in each subsequent year. So, first year, you should budget for a 4-day peer learning collaborative for Category 1. If you're coming in for Category 1 funding, you must budget for a 4-day peer learning collaborative meeting in the first year. If in Category 2 and 3, you are proposing funding for mentoring services, you will be required to attend the Peer Day Learning Collaborative as well in the first year of the project. So that will be, and it's detailed within the solicitation, up to 3 representatives to attend these meetings. We do not know the location, so if you go on to gsa.gov, it gives you a general idea of our per diems, our federally funded, or federally allowable per diems. That'll give you a sense on what to budget, how to budget, but making sure that you have a placeholder within your budget that addresses those required meetings for Category 1 and possibly Categories 2 and 3. So this solicitation, again, this is another distinction within your budget. Categories 1 and 3 do not require a match. So all of the funding can be used. However, I'm sorry, I said that incorrectly. So Categories 1 and 3 do not require a match. Category 2 does require a match. So if you propose a voluntary match in Category 1 and 3, and we approve that budget, that total match amount will be incorporated into the approved budget and become mandatory and subject to audit. So if you propose a match that goes over the $450,000 of what we will federally fund you'll be responsible to submit, and that could be subject to audit. In Category 2, this does require a match. So federal funds awarded under this solicitation may not cover more than 75% of the total cost of the project. That means you must identify a source of the 25% non-federal portion of the total project cost and how you will use match funds. So if you go on to DOJ Grants Financial Guide, and there's a link here, and I'm going to put the actual link into the chat as well, because it's I think it's going to be important for you all to have, for example, of in-kind services. Throw that in there real quick. Actually, I can't do that for some reason. All right, I'll make sure that I get it to William and that we get this actual link to the DOJ Grants Financial Guide. So this really details, gives you the formula, and there's an example of the formula within the solicitation too. But look closely at that as you're doing your budget. Categories 1 and 3, there's no match. Category 2, there is a match, and you'll be responsible for the 25% non-federal match. Here are all the other additional information, attachments, and requirements. I'm going to go through each one of these pretty briefly. It's detailed in the solicitation as well as the resource guide, but just so that you are familiar and you take a close look of what has to be submitted and what, if it is applicable to you, needs to be submitted. So the indirect cost rate agreement, if you are applying for indirect costs, you will need a current, which means unexpired, federally approved indirect cost rate agreement, and attach that to the application. None of these attachments count towards or against the 30-page program narrative requirement. These are all attachments. And if you do not have a currently federally approved rate and you are seeking indirect costs, you must request one through your cognizant federal agency if you are seeking indirect costs in your budget. Tribal authorization, if a tribe, tribal organization, or third party, if you are proposing to provide direct services or assistance to residents on tribal lands, you must include in your application a resolution, letter, affidavit, or other documentation as appropriate that demonstrate that you have the requisite authority from the tribe or tribes to implement the proposed project on tribal land. Every OJP applicant must submit the OJP Financial Management and System of Internal Controls questionnaire, which is found within your site as well. So everyone must submit that questionnaire, as well as disclosure of lobbying activities. Each applicant must complete this and submit this, even if you're not expending any funds for lobbying activities, or you do not, excuse me, if you do not expend any funds for lobbying activities, you're to enter NA in text box 10 and submit this form as an attachment as well. Every applicant is to disclose whether it has or if you are proposing as a subrecipient under any pending application for federal funding or cooperative agreements that, 1, includes requests for funding to support the same project being proposed in this application, or would cover any identical cost items outlined in the budget submitted to OJP as part of the application. So if you are any disclosure of any pending applications that relate to the funding program that we are funding needs to be a separate attachment. If you are designated as a DOJ high-risk grantee, please submit a separate attachment to your application informing us of such information. If you are proposing research, including research and development or evaluation, you must demonstrate research evaluation independence and integrity, including appropriate safeguards before receiving any funding. So that's any research or evaluation. And disclosure of process related to executive compensation. If you're a nonprofit, You may be required to make certain disclosures relating to the processes that you use to determine the compensation of your officers. Again, all this information and the specifics to each of these is within the solicitation as well as the grant resource guide. I just want to highlight them, bring them to your attention, pay close attention to those that impact you, and make sure that they are included because it can negatively affect your application if they are not included. I know, it's a lot. It's a tremendous amount. We also, this is new this year, and this may sound really new to you. We will give priority consideration to applications that propose projects to enhance public safety in federally designated qualified opportunity zones. So qualified opportunity zones, that those are those that are investing in economically distressed communities or that would benefit a disaster area. If that is you, and that is something that your community or within your jurisdiction, you should provide a narrative to explain the public safety benefit. So for resources on qualified opportunity zones, and if you want to find out if you are one, the current list of designated qualified opportunity zones can be found on the U.S. Department of the Treasury's resource webpage, which is listed here at the bottom. So click on that, check to see if you are, and if you're going to be using a priority consideration will be given to those that submit a narrative explaining the public safety benefit of this project within the qualified opportunity zone. And that's new this year. It's new to us as well. So if there's any more information, go to the U.S. Department of Treasury resource webpage. With regard to services provided to individual clients, applicants must ensure, absolutely must ensure that eligible victims served under this program are not concurrently served with other federally funded grants, so contracts or subawards issued to the applicant agency, specifically for services for victims of the human trafficking, such as awards funded by OBC, the Department of Health and Human Services, or other federal sources. So we really want to make sure that that we are addressing resource coordination with our other federal and state-funded grant programs. So we covered a lot. That is all the information to be included in the application. Now we'll get into the how. You should register with grants.gov prior to submitting your application. Again, all applications are due by 11:59 on July 29th, but to be considered timely, they must be submitted by the deadline using grants.gov, and we really do recommend that you submit early. You need to receive a validation message from grants.gov that indicates successful and timely submission. And that's why I was saying that 72 hours prior to the application due date is really the time frame you should consider applying. This will give you ample time to receive that validation message or rejection. If you get a rejection from grants.gov, and then it'll give you time to correct any problems that may have caused a rejection notification and get it in there by that deadline. Also recommend that you sign up for grants.gov email notifications regarding the solicitation. If it's modified, we certainly have been known to make errors. If there are any changes within that solicitation, those who sign up with grants.gov for updates will automatically be notified. As I mentioned, this is not your one and only opportunity. We're going to turn it over. We received quite a few questions in advance, which I will address. But if you have any questions about the requirements of the solicitation, our response center is open 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Monday through Friday, and 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. on the solicitation close date, which is July 29th. And they are standing by for questions. You can email them at any time. You can call during those hours. So they will be available and able to answer any questions you may have regarding the requirements. Now, if you have any issues that are technological, grants.gov customer support hotline. We have a number here, the website, as well as an email, and they are 24/7 except on federal holidays. So any issues, particularly as you are getting ready to upload and submit all of your information, they will be standing by to assist your efforts. So we went over the purpose, the how. It's been a tremendous amount of information, and please know that we are committed, and we take this process very, very seriously, which is one of the reasons why we put on these webinars. We make sure that you all have as much information that you can as you're developing your solicitations, or I'm sorry, your applications to the solicitation. And once we receive them, they will go through a peer review process to review your applications. And the number one thing in the beginning, we will see if they meet basic minimum requirements. And that means that was it submitted by an eligible type, which we've talked about already? Is the application requesting funding within the programmatic funding constraints? So what we talked about under each category, we'll take a close look at that. Was it responsive to the scope? And does it include all items designated as critical? So once it goes through this rigorous peer review process, award notifications will be made to those of you who are selected. So it's a lengthy process, but it's one that we take seriously because we really admire and respect and support the work that you all are doing in the field, and we want to make this process as fair and as open as we can. So with that, I will turn it back over to William to see if we have any questions.
Yes, and as I mentioned in the beginning with our audience, I will indeed help to moderate some of the questions for Cindy. So, Cindy, our first question, are there examples of previously funded projects under this award?
Yes and no. And that's an interesting question. It's actually a good one. We have funded this program in the past. In FY 2018, this was our specialized services and mentoring for child and youth victims of sex trafficking. Still a long title, but not as long as this year's. But that was one category, and it was funding for program sites, but it really dealt most specifically with Category 1. And we funded 3 program sites under that award. And we do have on our website links to those 3 awards. And that was in the amount of a little over $1.3 million. So information about all of our past solicitations and awards can be found at OJJDP.gov under the funding tab. So you can take a look and see what we funded in the past across all of our solicitations. So you'll see solicitation, and then you'll see awards made per year. So you can look through there and see all the work that we've been doing. But again, for this specific solicitation, this is new for us this year in having the 3 distinct categories.
Great. And Cindy, will OJJDP offer this solicitation in fiscal year 2020?
I hope so, because I think it's fantastic. But it's because I manage it. It's too soon to know, William. I'm certainly hopeful. We don't know what the FY 2020 budget will include. The best resource is looking at OJP's Funding Resource Center, which is at ojp.gov/funding. So you can always go back and take a look at that and see what we will be funding down the pike, but we don't know just yet. It's just a little too soon. Now, it is something to know, and this is within our solicitation, and for those that are funded under this award, we may provide additional funding in future years to awards made under this FY 17 solicitation through continuation awards, which we have done with our training and technical assistance providers specifically for this award. But again, we simply don't know what the future holds just yet.
And for the audience, I did indeed provide you all the website, the Funding Resource Center, for their convenience, Cindy.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Yes, of course, of course. And the next question that we have, is the funding the same for all 3 categories?
the funding amounts are. So the applicants can apply for funding up to $450,000 in each category. And the way we talked about the way that they're budgeted and this, but yeah, the category 1 is up to 4 awards for up to $450,000. Category 2, up to 3 awards for $450,000 each, and category 3, up to 4 awards for $450,000 each. So the maximum dollar amount is the same.
Excellent. And as a follow-up, Cindy, is there a match requirement for this thing?
Yeah, I covered that a little bit, but it's probably good to go over that again because there are some distinctions within this. As I'm seeing some of the questions come in now, really looking closely at when you're budgeting. So for categories 1 and 3, there is no match. You do not have to submit a match. And that match can be for those that want to, you can propose an in-kind or service match. But for categories 1 and 2, it is not required. I'm sorry, oh geez, I'm going to confuse everyone. For categories 1 and 3, it is not required. For category 2, there is a required match. So federal funds awarded under this part of the solicitation, under category 2, may not cover more than 75% of the total cost of the project. So think about what the total cost of your project will be. So starting with that, what is your full budget? And then take 75% of that. That's what the federal government will be able to fund under category 2. And then you will have to submit the 25% non-federal portion of the total project cost and how you will match those funds. So if you look on page 16 and 17 in the solicitation, this is, if you all have that open in front of you, it's a good place to go, is on 16 and 17. It gets into the details and even gives you the formula for developing your application and your budget narrative when you are looking to submit and do that formula for category 2, how to calculate that match if you're applying for that funding. So pay close attention to that, again, in category 2.
Great. Thank you for that, Cindy. And just to switch gears a little bit here, we're going to maybe ask a question in regards to the youth and their age and how it's defined. So, Cindy, how is youth defined for the purpose of this grant?
For eligible applicants, should propose direct funding to youth, must be 18 years, must not include youth who are 18 years of age or older in the population that you will serve. So OJJDP's funding is for youth 18 years of age and younger. And for category 3, youth involved in the juvenile justice system, we have a definition within the solicitation, refers to those youth younger than the age of 18 who have been arrested or referred for intake to a public agency, and that means state, tribal, city, or county, legally responsible for handling juvenile crime, delinquency, and youth in need of guidance, treatment, or rehabilitation. So I'm sorry, I'm reading directly from the solicitation, but the language is important. So category 2, youth involved in the juvenile justice system, there's a definition in there for that. But again, across all 3 categories, must not include youth who are 18 or older in the population that you are serving for this funding.
Great, thank you. And Cindy, can I apply for more than one category?
No, covered that a little bit in the beginning, but to reiterate, we offer the 3 program categories, and you must designate the category for which you are applying. You can submit an application for one category only, and that's important. If you submit, if an agency is submitted by the same, submits an application and under one category and then submits another one, we will only take the application that's submitted last based on the time and date stamp via the grants management system. So that very last application that an entity submits to us is what we will consider. That's the only one that we will consider.
All right, thank you. What is the competition ID reference in the solicitation, Cindy?
That's a great question. That's actually important to know. Let me see where that is in the solicitation. So when you're applying in grants.gov, it's important to select the appropriate competition ID. Let me find that exact page. Okay, so that begins on page 25. So 25 going into 26. So when you're submitting your application, it's important to select the correct competition ID. So again, under each category, we have, and they're pretty similar, they each start with OJJDP 2019, and then the numbers are different for each one. Again, go to page 26 of the solicitation. So for category 1, the last 5 digits are 16249. For category 2, 16250, and category 3 are 16251. So this information, again, on page 25 of the solicitation, and then on this submission step, as it notes in the solicitation, you can go to the OJP Grant Application Resource Guide for more information. But that is what distinguishes which category you're applying.
Thank you for that. And Cindy, how will I be notified if my agency is selected to receive an award?
Both the point of contact and the authorizing official listed on your application will receive an email notification, and this will give you all the information that you need to know for receiving the funds. And we anticipate that you'll be notified if you are selected to receive an award by September 30th, 2019.
So Cindy, as a follow-up, how will I be notified if my agency is not selected to receive an award?
Yes, it'll be the same process. It'll be the point of contact and authorizing official that you list on your application. And that we anticipate you'll receive notice that you were not selected by October 30th, 2019. And then that is when the award date will be beginning.
Fantastic. And so, Cindy, those are all of the questions that we have received in advance. So if you would like to respond to any questions in the chat box that have not been addressed yet, now would be the perfect time. Please note that we do have 21 minutes remaining.
Okay, thank you, William. I tried to, as they were coming in, try to address some of these, but I'll go through and see if there's any that that I have not. But again, if I miss anything, the response center will be available to address any of your questions. I did that. Does Category 3 require only justice-involved youth and or youth at high risk? It does not have to be justice-involved girls. It can be youth at risk, girls at risk of being involved in the juvenile justice system. The letters of support do not count towards the page limit. And there is no limit on how many pages for letters of support. We have actually, there have been cases in some of our applications where the letters of support packet is 50. It can be, there's no limit to that. So if you have letters of support from within your community with partnering agencies, absolutely include them, just include them by the deadline. We don't, so question from Joyce, will this training be in DC? We don't know the exact location of the training. So if you go on to gsa.gov, that gives our general overview of our per diem rates. So as you're just guesstimating what the travel will be for your up to 4 representatives for any trainings, use that as the guide, just the general. But we do not know for certain where the Training and Technical Assistance grantee meeting will be located. The question, and I apologize for not being clear about notification of we just want notification of being served by other grant-funded agencies. We just have to make sure that we are aware of any other funded programs and that we're not duplicating efforts across our federal agencies. So that is the disclosure of pending applications. Does substance abuse counseling count as direct service? Yes. And that can include alcohol treatment? Yes. Let's see, start date. Sorry, still going through all the questions here. I've covered quite a few of them. So I think I caused some confusion in the population served. Let's see, we've got a couple questions. So under the age of 18 should be the population served. Other questions about successful grant applications, again, go to the OJJDP.gov website. You can take a look at all of the application or all the funding that we've supported in the past, and then there should be links to the direct applicants that we funded, and as well as an overview. Typically, the project narrative will pop up when you go into the grants that we've funded. Okay. Current grantees are not eligible to apply. Couple questions about fees. Yes, all recipients and subrecipients, including any for-profit organization, must forgo any profit or management fee, and that's in all of the categories. Okay, I'm just taking some more time going through some of the additional questions. They're slowing down quite a bit, and just going back through to see if I haven't addressed any. Category 3 are groups that include mentoring. In Category 3 are groups that include mentoring looked at on more favorably. No, we're not lifting up any. Particular service model, but if you are, we do recommend using the resources provided. If services are provided prior to the 18th birthday, yes, they can continue through. You do not have to discharge from services upon turning 18. I have a question. Can the organization apply for? So there's an understanding that you can apply for only one, and yes, you can be listed as a sub-grantee on another application as long as the applicant, you need to disclose within the disclosure of pending applications across those two. So if you're going to be a sub-awardee on another application, that should be listed in both of your applications, if that makes sense. You can do that, you just cannot be the entity for multiple. Can volunteers be the same as mentors? Yes, there can be funding for volunteers across the 3 categories. The previous name of this grant, it was several, and where I had that written. So under FY18, this was the Specialized Services and Mentoring for Child and Youth Victims of Sex Trafficking. So just slightly different. FY18, Specialized Services and Mentoring for Child and Youth Victims of Sex Trafficking, and FY19, Specialized Services and Mentoring for Child and Youth Victims of Sex Trafficking and Sexual Exploitation. Those are the 2 distinctions.
All right. Cindy, it looks like our questions are going to slow down a little bit here.
I have one come into it. Let me do one more. I might have missed my question above. Sorry about that. With an existing contract with county corrections and or district attorney office to provide these services, would an existing contract let's see, let me get back to the, be careful on giving specific guidance to, let's see what it says in our solicitation. Yeah, if you have an existing contract, that should suffice as an agreement between, I would include letters of support with any partner agencies in addition to any, in addition to your documentation.
And while we're waiting for more questions, and I just want to remind the audience that you have accessibility to supporting materials and documents in the handouts pod located directly above the chat pod. You can just simply go in and select the name of the document and click the download button, be able to access the documents there. Remember, our documents also include important information that we went over for today's grant solicitation, including a PDF of the solicitation. Those important links in there as well that you all probably saw earlier in the chat. So just wanted to give folks a friendly reminder of that.
And my apologies, and I've seen this question a couple times, and I'm trying to get clarification on the answer if a current grantee can apply, because I see that at least one person was not able to serve at-risk youth. They had to be survivors. So I'm trying to seek guidance right now on whether a current grantee can apply. It does not say within the solicitation specifically or that you cannot. So what I would like you to do, William, can you put my email address up? And then...
Or would you like, Cindy, for me to maybe provide TJRS email just in case?
Yes, I don't want to give anyone misguided information, but we don't specifically address that within the solicitation, and it's a great question. So I want to get that answer,
Gotcha.
and then we will get that back out to the field.
Yeah, sure, no worries. And we are coming down to time, and so I do want to just remind folks of the slide here. We do have the information for NCJRS where you can submit questions and even call at telephone number to the response center. They respond fairly quickly, and also it helps to document your questions as they come in as well. Just wanted to remind folks of that too, Cindy, so that they know where to send those questions. Yeah, sure.
It's a good question and possibly a miss, so that's why I appreciate these calls as well. We learn what we can do better too.
Great. And thank you, audience, for your questions, and I appreciate that. Cindy, did you want me to wrap up, or do you see any questions that we
are coming to a close, and then I'm going to get on finding that answer now.
Problem.
So that our response center has that answer when they reach out to them.
Sounds good. Yeah. Well, thank you again, audience, for joining today. Just a few last-minute items that I wanted to remind folks of that we covered in the very beginning of this webinar, but then I'll just provide for you just one last time. So don't forget to, for everyone, that you can contact the National Training and Technical Assistance Center at the website displayed on this slide. And don't forget that you can stay up to date on the latest information by signing up for NTTAC's TTA listserv. And also don't forget to check us out on Facebook, OJJDP TTA. If you'd like to get in contact with OJJDP, you can do so via the Help Desk by following the contact information on this slide. Do you have a training or technical assistant need? Well, if so, please submit a request via the OJJDP TTA 360 platform that is accessible through the link in this slide. As a reminder, the webinar recording will be archived on NTTAC's YouTube channel, where you can also view past webinars. And for the event script and supporting materials, you can contact the OJJDP TTA Help Desk. And lastly, I would like to remind everyone, if they could please, we would greatly appreciate if you could take just about 5 minutes to complete the feedback evaluation. Again, thank you all for joining us today. Have a great afternoon. Goodbye.